like to reconvene the Ways and Means Committee. And the first bill we'll have up is the Disaster Relief Bill by Representative Pelowski. And Representative Pelowski reminds me that this is one of the longer bills that we're going to have today. So if you could present the bill and maybe...
Mr. Chair, I think I better move the adoption of the Greater Minnesota Economic Development Finance Division report for House File 2611.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion.
Then, Mr. Chair, I move that House File 2611 be recommended to be placed on the General Register.
Okay, that motion is before us. Representative Pelowski.
And then I'm going to move the A1 amendment, and the A1 amendment would clarify that this is a one-time transfer. It would also double the length of the bill. So, Mr. Chair, we had, until the amendment, a new record for omnibus bills, one sentence. I had set the previous record in 2014 in higher ed with the two-sentence omnibus bill for higher ed. I'm going to tie that record now if this amendment goes on and should the bill proceed for the shortest omnibus bill,
So,
two sentences.
Representative Pelowski, I made my comments too soon then when I talked about how short the bill was going to be. You've doubled the size.
Yeah,
Okay.
true, Mr. Chair, and I didn't want to embarrass you.
Okay. And Representative Driscowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the amendment, Representative Pelowski, the word "one time," I know it's not your subject area, but it looks kind of weird to me. Did you check in with Representative Erickson to make sure we're spelling "one time" correctly?
Mr. Chair, Representative Drazkowski, I try to keep my spelling corrections. This isn't actually my document, but I do watch spelling, as you noticed. Even last night on a certain document, there was an interesting anomaly with the spelling of my name. So I watch it very closely.
Okay, we need to vote on the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Mr. Chair, the bill is the final bill in the number of discussions we've had with various disasters over this legislative session, but these are natural disasters that we're dealing with today. I don't have a handout, but I do have a reminder for the committee. In the last 21 years, we've had 16 special sessions. And to remind the committee, there is nothing special about a special session. When we compress everything down to a day or a couple of days, we invariably make mistakes and errors. What this does is ensure that when we do address a disaster, we will have the totality of the cost and the numbers will be correct, and we will be able to get aid to those areas as quickly as possible should there be a presidential declaration, a gubernatorial declaration of a disaster. So this would allow us to proceed over the interim and address those disasters that hopefully won't be coming, but invariably will be coming. So that's basically the bill, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any discussion on the bill? Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the author of the bill, Representative Pelowski. You and I have a long and somewhat storied past with regard to disasters of a natural design, not of our own doing. But I want to thank you for your founding preparation of both chapters, and appreciate the candor and also the vigilance to watch over those with the manner in which you've done that. And I look forward to working with you in the future on other related matters.
Mr. Chair and Representative Albright, Representative Albright brought forward an issue that occurred in his district with a disaster that had happened, and I want to remind members that nothing's perfect, and we do not know what types of disasters are going to come before us. So when they come, and when we do have anomalies, we're going to have to address them and do modifications like we did with Representative Albright. And just a reminder to everyone, we have local units of governments. We have townships, counties, school districts, cities. All of these various entities do have a playbook but there are things that happen that are not anticipated. So to Representative Albright, I'm glad that we had the discussion and we made the changes, but there invariably will be future changes that we're going to have to be made as we proceed.
All right. Okay, we have Representative Davis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Pelowski. This is very necessary. Our area has lived through some very serious disasters, and because of your work, you've made it a lot more, you've made it much better when we're in these situations. So thank you for your work, and I'm going to be very happy to vote yes on this one. Thank you, Representative Pelowski.
Okay, any further discussion? This is one that will be folded in, so I'll temporarily lay the bill over then. Thank you, Representative
Thank you,
Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
We go now to the Judiciary Finance Bill. Representative Lesch, and we need a couple of motions. Representative Lesch, will Representative Knorr.
Mr. Chair, members, I move adoption of the Judiciary Finance and Civil Law Division report for House File 2705.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Representative Knorr.
Mr. Chair, I move that House File 2705 as amended be recommended to be placed on the General Register.
Okay, the motion is before us. Representative Lesch, there are no amendments, so if you could explain the bill.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the Omnibus Judiciary Finance Bill this year for 20 and 21, the base, we are $91.4 million over base for a total of $1.47 billion. We essentially, what we did is we funded the governor's budget request, supplemental budget requests, with a few additions that we pay for by raising civil and probate fees by $50 and adding a court data breach prevention fee of $1. That latter raises $400,000. The changes from the governor's asks are House File 1784, Representative Cantrell. It's an early neutral evaluation study from the University of Minnesota to determine the effectiveness of how we're doing early neutral evaluations in family law cases. Second, we gave the district court judges 1% above the 3% ask from the courts. The reason for this is because of the lag that district court judges have experienced since those lean years of 2003 to 2007. They fell behind everyone else. The original ask from the governor for the courts was 3.5% across the board for both years. The judges were asking for 5. The district court judges were asking for 5. The supplemental dropped that request to 3 and 3, and we funded the district court judges at 4. And we also do this with the civil and probate filing fee increase. The total cost is $7.3 million on that. There's an additional 2% one-time increase to Public Defense Board. This really, I think, has been the committee's top priority for funding due to the extraordinary caseloads that public defenders have to work through in Minnesota, as well as the low salaries they experience. The fourth one is civil asset forfeiture. This costs $720,000 in 2021 and $1.3 million in 22-23. This is due to the revenue loss from various accounts. It is we maintain that civil asset forfeiture, law enforcement taking your stuff, is an issue, but we also recognize that law enforcement uses that money for some good stuff. So that's what accounts. That's what the cost accounts for. Finally, or the next, number 5, we have the Commission on Intelligence and Technology. This is so that the legislature can take a look at new technologies coming online that may affect your privacy or may risk individual citizens' data breaches, and we can get a handle on that ahead of time so we're not constantly reacting to it and chasing after it, which is what the legislature's been doing for the last 12 years. Next is private cooperative divorce. If you and your spouse can agree on the terms, you can reach an agreement under Minnesota law without having to spend tens of thousands of dollars on attorney's fees. Next, criminal traffic surcharge. One of the things we did, Mr. Chair and members, back in those lean years also is we stacked a surcharge upon everyone's fines and fees that is now at $76. The judges are not allowed to waive to indigent defendants. Quite frankly, what happens is they're not able to pay that, so their license gets suspended, and they drive around with a suspended license, and they get picked off for that, and they draw another court appearance for that. So this allows judges to waive that for indigent defendants and has the associated costs with that. Next, there's Representative Becker-Finn's House File 113, the Ramsey County fine revenue. Members, every other city in the state, if you prosecute something, you get 2/3. Minneapolis gets 80%, incidentally. But for some reason, the Ramsey County suburban cities get 1/2. So they were complaining about that, justly, we thought, and that accounts for the $346,000. And then how we pay for this, Mr. Chair and members, is, as I stated previously, the civil and probate filing fee increase of $50 and the court data breach prevention fee of $1. There are several policy bills included herein as well. Am I speaking to those, Mr. Chair, or are we just talking about the finance part of this?
Well, we kind of leave it up to the presenter, but remember, it is the Finance Committee.
Well, I'll hold off and I'll answer questions on them in case people have, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, any discussion? Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks Representative Lesch, Chair Lesch, for running a good committee. This isn't a bill that's highly controversial. There are a couple of things in it that are troublesome, but overall, I think it's a decent bill, and it does spend more money than than in the past years. But I just I want to thank Representative Lesch for putting some really good provisions in the bill. I think the forfeiture piece, we learned this earlier this week that might still need a little bit of work during conference committees and so forth. And so I know that you're willing to work on that, and I appreciate you bringing the bill. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Groff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This bill, it looks like the target for this committee, as was stated by Chairman Lesch, is $91 million above base, and then the spreadsheet lists a total general fund revenue of additional revenue of about $8 million. Is that a Representative Lesch? The item that's on 112 of the spreadsheet, was that the judicial discretion for waiving surcharges? Is that what 112 is?
Representative Lesch.
Mr. Chair and Representative Garofalo, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so net general,
Representative Garofalo.
thank you, net general impact, general fund impact here, am I correct in saying, and I'll look at Mr. Marks, is about $100 million above base? 91.4 million plus the 7.9 million?
Ms. Marks.
Mr. Chair and Representative Garofalo, as far as general fund spending, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Marks or Chairman Lesch, outside of the general fund, the impact, where do we see on this spreadsheet that number for the non-general fund spending increases?
Mr. Marks, do you want to take that, or shall we ask?
It should be on, Mr.
Okay, we
Chair.
have another fiscal analyst that will perhaps be able to help us with that. If you could identify yourself for the record.
Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, the judiciary budget for all the agencies is primarily, it's general fund only. However, there were a couple impacts on, we did create some special revenue funds to receive the proceeds of forfeited property in the forfeiture bill that did not exist previously. That's the only other activity we have outside of general fund spending.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I could, just a final question for Representative Lesch.
And by the way, for the record, that was Mr. Walls that made the previous comments. Just for the record, for the tape. Okay, Representative Ruffle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And which one of these three bills today is going to be the vehicle that is merged into one? So the Mariani bill will encompass.
I'll be laying this one over like I did the others too, and then we'll be folding them into the Mariani bill.
Okay. So, well, Mr. Chairman, and I'll talk about the fiscal matters on this bill, but obviously there's some very provocative and controversial language in the Mariani bill, and I'm not going to. I'll save it for that discussion there. But this bill, we're talking about once again a bill where the general fund impact is well over 10% of an increase in spending. This is unsustainable spending, even with tax increases. You cannot have government spending growing at a faster rate than personal income growth and population growth. It's not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's math. And so we're seeing in this bill, once again, we're seeing government grow at a faster rate than the private economy, and it's unsustainable, and but I'll save my other comments. I think when this bill gets merged to the other bill, I think there's going to be some more serious objections to what we're voting on. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Lesch.
Okay, any further discussion? Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Lesch, I was just curious if you could clear up a question for me regarding early neutral evaluation. That generally refers to, as you were mentioning, divorcing situations. But I was wondering in the bill here why a contract is given to the University of Minnesota Board of Regents to conduct the study. Can you tell me just a little bit more about that?
Well, Mr. Chair and Representative Hertaus, I don't recall discussion about why it's the regents per se. I know that they've identified the U as being in a unique position to conduct this study. We heard about that from several folks. There were objections as well from members of the family law bar saying that, no, we don't need any changes in family law. It's working just fine. But the U has been doing studies like this, so that's why it's going to the U.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lesch.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, then I'll lay the bill over for possible or for inclusion in the next House file, which is being identified as Representative Mariani's bill, but technically it's House File 2792.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members.
Representative Mariani being the chair and the chief author. I'll give you a chance to get settled in at the table, Representative Mariani. And Representative Mariani, would you care to move the division report?
Mr. Chair, members, I move adoption of the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform, Finance and Policy Division report for House File 2792.
Mr. Chairman, I would request a roll call on that motion. I'd like to discuss, I'd like to talk about it, please.
Okay, there's a roll call been requested. Any discussion on the motion? This is the one where we're simply adopting the division report. Representative Graffo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I inadvertently referred to this as the Mariani bill earlier. I probably shouldn't have done that. I should have referred to it as House File 2792. But that being said, I want to let you, Representative Mariani, and others know I take the consequences of this bill very seriously. Okay? This is not some sort of tinfoil hat, right-wing conspiracy theory that people are coming for our guns. It is real. It is absolutely real. As recently as 10 years ago, it was not the law of this country. The law of this country was, there's an interpretation of it, that my right to own a firearm was somehow tied to being in a militia, that I did not have an individual right to own a firearm. And thank goodness with the Heller decision, the U.S. Supreme Court rightfully ruled that I, as an individual, independent of any membership in a militia, have a constitutional right to own a firearm. The provisions in this bill are regarding gun control are divisive, they're controversial, and they're wrong. The reality is law enforcement has the tools available right now to protect society from those who are mentally ill, disturbed, or shouldn't be in the possession of guns. They have that ability right now. The presumption of the burden of proof should not rely on the citizen to prove they're reliable to own a gun. The burden of proof should rely on the state to take that away. The so-called universal background checks provision in this bill is nothing more than an attempt to build a national, statewide government gun registry database. Why do we know that? Because when the Obama administration studied the regulation of private transactions, what did they say? They said private gun transactions, the only way they could enforce it was with a government database of tracking it. Now, the other side will say, well, this is happy talk. It's not that big of a deal. Keep in mind, every Democratic Party's presidential candidate for the last 20 years has held that previously held view that the right to own a firearm is tied to militia membership, not as an individual. So this is not some sort of extreme fanatical viewpoint that we need to be paranoid about. Hillary Clinton held that view when she ran for president in 2016, and I suspect that next year's Democratic Party candidate for president will hold the same way. These are attacks on our personal freedoms, our individual liberties, and our right to bear arms. I am 100% confident that the membership of the Minnesota State Senate will not allow these provisions to become law. That being said, it concerns me that one party is so interested and so freely willing to take away my rights as an American. So, Mr. Chairman, for that reason and other reasons, I would ask members of this committee to vote no on this division report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and we'll have ample opportunity to debate the bill, but this is a procedural motion to begin to get the bill before us. So the clerk will take the.
Mr. Chair, can you clarify that? What exactly does this vote mean? Does this mean you're agreeing with?
We're adopting the division report, and then the second motion that will follow would be to move the bill.
So, Mr. Chair,
we're just putting the division report before us. I would say that my take on that is it's a procedural motion to get the division report before us. I don't view it personally as
Mr. Chair,
vote one way or another for the bill. It will come later.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Just clarification on that. We did have this debate in Education Finance with the division report, and Patrick McCormick was up, and he explicitly said a yes vote on this is a vote that you agree with the division report as in front of us and as amended. So I just think the members should be clear that a yes vote on this is agreeing with what's in the division report. A no vote is disagreeing with what's in the report. So I think we should be clear on, it's not just a procedural thing, it is a vote of affirmation.
All except if that's what our chief counsel has indicated. If you'll recall, my words were that, in my view, I said that I didn't view it as a vote on the bill, but if Mr. McCormick, who is our expert on these, indicates that it is, then
his words, not mine, sir.
Yeah, that'll be up to the members then to determine how they perceive the vote. Clerk will take the roll.
Representative Carlson?
Aye.
Representative Olson?
Aye.
Representative Garofalo?
No.
Representative Albright? No. Representative Bernardi?
Aye.
Representative Davids?
No.
Representative Dabney?
Aye.
Representative Driscowski?
No.
Representative Eklund?
No.
Representative Hamilton?
No.
Representative Hansen?
Aye.
Representative Hausman?
Yes.
Representative Hertas?
No.
Representative Hornstein? Representative Grisha?
No.
Representative Liebling?
Yes.
Representative Lilly? Representative Long?
Yes.
Representative Mariani?
Yes.
Representative Marquardt? Representative Nelson? Representative Neuer?
Yes.
Representative Pelowski?
Yes.
Representative Hoppy?
Yes.
Representative Schumacher? Representative Scott? Representative Torkelson?
No.
Representative Vogel?
No.
Representative Wagenius?
Yes.
Representative Lilly, this is a motion to adopt the division report.
Very much in favor.
Being 14 ayes and 11 nays, the division report is adopted. Representative Mariani, do you have another motion?
Mr. Chair, I do. I'd like to move the A60 amendment.
First of all, we move the bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're
You're
right.
just a step ahead.
This is, I jumped out ahead. Mr. Chair, members, I move that House File 2792, as amended, be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay, that
Chair.
motion is before us, and now we have an author's amendment. Representative Mariani.
Mr. Chair, I would move the A60 amendment.
Excuse me, Representative Albright.
Mr. Chair, and I would request a roll call on the motion to bring the bill to the general register.
Okay, that will, that motion is before us. We're not voting on it yet.
I'm sorry. Yep. That's fine.
But remind me of that later so we
Thank
don't
you.
have any mix-ups like we had
Did
yesterday.
yesterday?
So Representative Mariani, you have an author's amendment. Representative Mariani, would you care to move the amendment?
Mr. Chair, yes, I would move the A60 amendment. And, Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer a very brief oral amendment to it. It's just an error in drafting the language before us, and I'd ask Mr. Sullivan to explain that very quickly.
I think you can just incorporate that, but
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Mr. Chair and members, the change on the A60 amendment is on page 2, line 6. And the change is before 19,000, insert reduced by, and before 131,000, insert increased by. So the line 2.6, as modified by the author's incorporated change, would read, page 7, line 21, delete reduced by $19,000, and insert increased by $131,000.
Okay, and Representative Mariani has incorporated that in his amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, then, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Representative Mariani, the A58 amendment.
Mr. Chair, I would move the A58 amendment.
Okay, that motion is before us. Representative Mariani on the amendment.
Mr. Chair, it's a pretty simple amendment. It says that the appropriation, if there's an appropriation in this act that's enacted more than once, the 2019 session, the appropriation must be given effect only once.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, then, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Representative Mariani, would you care to explain the bill?
Mr. Chair, members, I'm really proud to present the 2019 House Public Safety Criminal Justice Reform Omnibus Finance Bill. This year, our House Committee focused on the theme of community-centered public safety. In state appropriation terms, that means that we continue to fund our corrections and policing functions while also funding both systems and community-based interventions to prevent crimes, to remediate for crime, and to equip offenders to become productive citizens and community builders. This bill is the product of a broad range of Minnesotans that includes conservative and liberal citizen groups as well as county attorneys working on probation reform, the ACLU and other civil liberties groups working on reforming fines and fees, labor representatives working to keep our prisons safe for both guards and inmates, communities of color and indigenous communities stepping up to police their communities effectively, protect their civil rights, and create positive interventions with youth, and survivors of sexual assault working on holding the prosecution of offenses offenders accountable, rather holding the prosecution of crimes against them accountable to their voice while advancing awareness and prevention of these crimes. Together, these diverse Minnesotans over the course of several months shaped a bill that invests state resources to lift the voices of those affected by crime, address systemic issues by reforming systemic issues, prioritizes preventative over punitive measures, engages in transparent problem solving, and decriminalizes poverty. Mr. Chair, members, the major fiscal features of the bill include that the bill itself comes in at the established targets set by this body for the next biennium and in our tails. We spend $121.4 million over the general fund base. That reflects a $7.1 million appropriation over the governor's request. The bill funds the Department of Corrections, including our state prisons, and the Department of Public Safety, including our Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA. It provides for all of the governor's initiatives, with exceptions of providing for 110 new correction guards instead of the 120 in his proposal, and we phase those in over 4 years. Vital public servants are covered in this budget, including state prison guards and investigative agents at the BCA. The bill also funds the Office of Justice Programs with $3.7 million and one-time funding for youth intervention, domestic abuse prevention, community policing grants, and ongoing funding for statewide sex trafficking prevention. The bill funds emergency management and communications networks work and the school safety center. The bill extends out for another year the police training dollars currently set to sunset at the end of the next biennium in order to keep investing in the skill development of our peace officers. This is a $6 million commitment beyond the present sunset and is reflected in our tails. Due to decreasing revenue from the special revenue fund that collects traffic fines, there is a shortfall now and into the future from maintaining the operations of the post board. This bill transfers those revenues and base post board expenditures into the general fund. The bill does include provisions related to gun regulations, including the background check and extreme risk protection order, and also provision related to private prison preemption. This bill, members, maintains and grows vital services to keep our public safety, including police training, probation services, emergency management, and first responder communications. We worked really hard and in as inclusive manner as we could over the course of the last several months to create a public safety criminal justice reform finance bill that is driven by multi-party work. I urge your adoption of our work and movement of the bill to the general body for its consideration, and I stand for any questions you may have.
Okay, any discussion on the bill, House File 2792? Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Mariani, is there anything in this bill to address the issue? I know there's a shortage of people to be correction officers. There's a lot of vacancies that need to be filled there, and I'm wondering what you did in this bill to address that problem.
Representative Mariani.
Mr. Chair and Representative Scott, we did a couple of things. One, I already mentioned that we appropriated for the ability to have the department fill in the shortage that they have. A number of us visited Stillwater Prison right at the beginning of session and heard directly from guards and staff as well as inmates. And there was, quite frankly, a lot of agreement. There was a lot of tension, for sure, between the 2-3 groups because of the tragic event there, death there at the end of the year. But there was agreement that a shortage of guards meant that that facility, the people in it who worked in it and who lived there, did not feel safe. The need for guards to be present in sufficient numbers makes it possible to do the kind of programming that gives some purpose of meaning and structure for the inmates in the facilities, which contributes to safety. In addition to that, this bill invests in the beginning stages of doing some strong interventions for, quite frankly, mental health supports and counseling, particularly for our guards. We were struck by the nature of pain and to some degree a feeling of being isolated and left out, of being able to, being left out of opportunities to express their grief upon the loss of their colleague. And they told us pretty directly that that kind of environment makes it very difficult to recruit individuals into the facility. And so trying to create a place where the word gets out in the general population that if you work here, you're going to be supported. The institution has your back. It's providing professional services to deal with what admittedly is a very highly stressful environment and vocation. So those are two things that this bill does to be able to address that issue. There has been ongoing conversations between the Commissioner of Corrections and the representatives of the guards to continue to work on working conditions and pay conditions for them that hopefully will lead to making that profession a much more attractive for prospective candidates.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so could you explain this backfilling process a little bit to me? Because my understanding is that some of those funds to fill those positions has been used elsewhere. Do you know anything about that?
Representative Mariani.
Mr. Chair and Representative Scott, that perhaps might be a better question for the Commissioner of Corrections. I think he can provide much more detailed insight to that, and if he's here, I would certainly.
Is he present? Yeah, there we go. Okay. And Mr. Schnell, if you could identify yourself for the record.
Paul Schnell, Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, to your question, the existing funds have not been used for other purposes with one exception, and that is overtime to backfill current vacancies. So we have not used or diverted funds for any other purpose other than to cover open spots. And so we have used dollars that would normally be allocated for personnel to overtime to fill holes in our schedule throughout our facilities.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that response, Commissioner Schnell. And I'm concerned about the starting pay and the pay scale for these people. They have a really, really tough job. And some of them live in my district, and they've been in my office before, and they're taking their lives into their own hands every day. Really, it's a tough job. So, what does this bill do to increase the starting pay and kind of condense the salaries, the salary pay scale going forward? Representative Mariani.
Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, I'm just looking for some language here really quick relative to your question, I believe. Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, if you look on page 20.32, so this is in the writers section of the bill, under staffing, recruitment, and retention, we're providing $4 million each year for staffing and recruitment and retention activities, so we can certainly have the commissioner speak to what his plans are relative to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd be interested in hearing that.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, there are a number of things that are being addressed. Certainly, there is, the contracts are open now, so the bargaining units are actively engaged in collective bargaining with the state. We are certainly having conversations. We are aware of the differences between the starting pay, for instance, that the state has and many of the counties, and that is definitely a priority. We are also have changed our hiring protocols, processes. Right now, presently or previously, anybody who applied for a job as a corrections officer would need to come to central office. We are beginning, in fact, this next week, we will start regional hiring processes at Minnesota Correctional Facility in Faribault. We'll hold a localized recruitment event where candidates would be able to come, hear about the position, apply, interview, and initiate the background process. And we believe that we would be able to turn make offers within a matter of days to complete that background investigation instead of the weeks or months that it had taken in the past. And we also have identified processes to get candidates into the academy much quicker, because we're up against a lot of other industries that are able to hire oftentimes on the spot and get people started.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Schnell, so $4 million each year for staffing, recruitment, and retention. And so are you then doing anything to increase the starting salaries for these folks?
Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, we are in the midst of having conversations. We are prepared to have those conversations, and we're working with the union to have those discussions to bring that starting pay up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And beyond the concerns over the size and scope of government and raising taxes, higher spending that's in this bill, I do want to focus on my concerns about the gun control portions in this bill. What has happened here is the DFL has chosen conflict over cooperation. It's chosen confrontation over consensus and is deciding on coercion instead of collaboration. And it's that last word I want to focus on, coercion. Members, I don't whine about process around here. The reality is that the majority party uses the appropriations process as leverage to get the policy they want. It's something you do in the negotiation process to get the other side of the aisle to work with you. Complaining about that is something the minority political party does. Both sides of the aisle have used this as a tool. But this bill is coercion for another reason. The inclusion of these gun control amendments in this bill are for one reason and one reason only. You don't have the votes. There are 9 members of the House DFL caucus who do not want to vote for those gun control bills. It's the worst kept secret at the Capitol right now. Those 9 members, combined with the 59 members of the Republican caucus, compromise the majority of the legislative chamber that can defeat these gun control measures. But rather than allow a stand-up vote on the bill, you are coercing your own members, not us. You are coercing DFL members who do not want to vote for this bill by tucking it into an omnibus bill and making it a referendum on supporting your House leadership. That is unfair to those House DFL members, and it's unfair to the citizens of Minnesota. I am opposed to these gun control bills, but if you want to have a debate about gun control, if you want to get burned at the election box, taking people's guns like you always have since the 1990s, bring it on. I jokingly, back in 2013, someone asked me a question, do you think the Democrats, with their new legislative majorities and total control of the state, are they going to pass gun control? And my comment to the reporter was, only if they were stupid. And that was back in 2013. And to Speaker Thiessen's credit and the DFL majorities, they knew not to do it. And yet, here we are, 6 years later. Thank goodness we have a Senate Republican majority to protect us. But we have a DFL turning on its own members, forcing these controversial policy provisions into an omnibus bill to exert coercion and pressure on their own members to make them vote for it. So I'm a no on this bill. I want to thank the bipartisan opposition to these provisions. I know the next couple of weeks are not going to be easy for those DFL members who oppose it, but I ask them to hold strong, and together we're going to defeat these initiatives, and we're going to protect our Second Amendment rights in this state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? Representative Albright, I think this is the point where your earlier request comes into play.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would request a roll call on the motion.
Okay, the motion is before us, and there will be a slightly different motion because this is going to be folded in, but you'll have your vote. Representative Mariani, would you like to move that the language contained in House File 2792 as amended be included in a separate article in the omnibus bill?
Mr. Chair, I would so move.
Okay, and this avoids the problem that we had yesterday because there now will be a vote on the Mariani bill. And then we will have a series of motions pending the outcome of this vote that will incorporate the other ones that were laid over. So any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Mariani.
Just very quickly, I certainly appreciate the passion that Representative Garofalo brings to this conversation. It's not the first time I've heard it, and won't be the last, and that's okay. But I would hope, members, that we don't let those passions eclipse what truly has been an incredibly strong effort to find common space in lots of other areas. The bill itself is full of works that spring from the work of the prior majority. We gave a lot of room and daylight to review the hard work that had been done in the previous biennium that was pushed out by the now minority party at that time when they controlled this body. We also created pretty smart, effective, objective opportunities for members of the committee from both sides of the party, or both sides of the aisle, rather, to work on some really important legislation, including efforts to reform our sexual assault investigation and prosecution work in our state, and also on probation reform issues as well. I absolutely totally understand how people need to vote on this based on the other provisions of this bill, but I certainly want to remind us that there is a lot of common people's work that exists at the core of this bill. It's been a real privilege to have led that effort, and I look forward to continuing this debate and delivering on those, especially those areas where there is really a lot of agreement across the aisle. So with that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the clerk will take the roll.
Representative Carlson?
Aye.
Representative Olson? Aye. Representative Garofalo?
No.
Representative Albright?
No.
Representative Bernardi?
Yes.
Representative Davids?
No.
Representative Dabney?
Aye.
Representative Driscousky? Representative Eklund? Representative Hamilton?
No.
Representative Hansen?
Yes.
Representative Hausman?
Yes.
Representative Hertas?
Oh, no.
Representative Hornstein? Representative Krisha?
No.
Representative Liebling?
Oh, yes.
Representative Lilly?
Yes.
Representative Long?
Yes.
Representative Mariani?
Yes.
Representative Morcourt? Representative Nelson? Representative Newer?
Yes.
Representative Pelowski?
Yes.
Representative Poppy?
Yes.
Representative Shoemaker? Representative Scott?
No.
Representative Torkelson?
No.
Representative Vogel?
No.
Representative Wagenius?
Yes.
And Representative Nelson?
Yes.
Being 15 ayes and 10 nays, the motion prevails. We'll now go to a motion by Representative Pelowski. Would you like to move that House File 2792 be incorporated, or that we incorporate the language in House File 2611 as amended as a separate article? Representative Pelowski. So moves. Any discussion? Seeing none, then, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Representative Nora, would you like to move to incorporate the language contained in House File 2705 as amended into House File 2792 as a separate article? Representative Nora.
I so move.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Representative Mariani renews his motion that House File 2792 as amended be recommended to be placed on the general register and that the staff be directed to make the technical corrections and amend the title. That motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carried. Members, we have Representative Dehn's bill up next. Oh, there he is. I was looking for him in the audience. So, House File 2792, I don't remember if I said carried, but it did carry.
Make sure you burn up a few hours.
The amendment.
What, you're leaving? What? You don't want to hear my bill?
The amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, Representative Olson.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move
House File
House
1543.
File 1543, the first engrossment be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay, the motion is before us, and there is an author's amendment. Do you want to take the author's amendment now?
Mr. Chair, yeah, if someone could move that for me, that would be great. I'm happy to explain it if you'd like that
Yeah, we'll move it. First.
after it's moved. Great.
Representative Olson?
Yep, I will move the A3 amendment for the author.
Okay, that motion is before us. Representative Dehn.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm bringing forward this amendment because there was some concern raised by actually the number 2 author on the bill in the GOP that the language was not tight enough in the original bill as far as who would be covered from the ability to actually get a set aside from the disqualification. So that's why this before us. I'll talk a little bit more about the bill when we actually get to the bill. So again, this is meant to actually add clarity and tighten the original intent of the bill.
Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none then, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Representative Dehn on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. House File 1543 is a iteration of a bill that was previously carried by Representative Lomer. We've done some things to sort of tighten up the language in the original draft of the bill and now with the additional language in the amendment. And what the bill does is it allows individuals to get a set aside from a disqualification to work within the substance use and disorder treatment field. We're at a crisis. I mean, we've been talking a lot about opioid addiction and other addictions this past session, and we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis where we have a need out there, and unfortunately, a lot of the individuals who could play a significant role as counselors to counsel individuals dealing with addiction are currently unable to get set-asides from that disqualification because of a past criminal history. And one of the things the bill does is it makes it real clear that these are for nonviolent crimes. If you look at references 254C.15, which calls out many of those provisions that don't allow for the set-aside, and we've added several more as well. And I'm, a little bit confused why there might be resistance, but I've heard there might be resistance. In the end, this is a great need in our community. And as someone who a long time ago was going through a chemical dependency treatment center, when people have addictions, it's really hard for them to give credibility to individuals who may not have had similar life experiences that they have had. This is intended to make sure that those individuals that have turned their lives around, almost all of them that they've gone through education to become a counselor in a center, that they have the ability to get that position. Two things to make clear. This is only for facilities that only service individuals 18 years and older, so this wouldn't be for adolescent centers. And it does another thing that I think is critical, is once an individual gets a set-aside from the disqualification, should they change jobs, they don't have to go through the whole process again, and their employer doesn't have to go through the whole process of getting an exemption for them to work there. So I think this is a great bill. I think it will help a lot of need, and I open myself up for questions if members have it.
Are there any questions on the bill as amended? Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Dehn. As I'm looking at your amendment that we adopted, the A3, and just fitting it into the bill, I just have a question. The 245C.15 is referred to a couple of times in the bill. Can you just remind us of what is in section 245C.15? It's on line 3.1 of the bill, line 3.2. It talks about that the individual is not disqualified under those sections, and I just wonder what those sections are.
Representative
Representative Liebling, 245C.15 talks about permanent disqualifications, and it ranges from violation of a predatory offender registration law, murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, murder in the third degree, manslaughter in the first degree. There's actually quite a long exhaustive list. I'm happy to go through all of them if you'd like, but we've made very clear that individuals that have done crimes that most people would consider heinous and troubling are not going to be able to get a set aside through this process. This is really meant to create those individuals that probably have what many people might consider lower level offenses, the ability to actually work and try to help other individuals who are entering treatment to get to recovery as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Dehn. I thought that might be the case, and I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified. Thank you, and I appreciate the additional language as well.
Okay, any further discussion? Representative Wilson.
Mr. Chair, I renew my motion that House File 1543, the first engrossment as amended, be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Tomorrow, members, we will be meeting at approximately 9:30, not 1900 hours, 9:30, or after session. Was session at 9:30? I thought it was 9. We will meet 15 minutes after session. And what we will be taking up tomorrow, just for members' information, is taxes, state government, finance, Veterans Affairs, and a couple of smaller standalone bills. They've all been posted. And then we are going to be tomorrow amending the budget resolution. So we'll probably do the budget resolution first tomorrow, and then maybe take up veterans, and we may give time for about a half-hour caucus before we take up the tax committee, or the tax bill. So both caucuses will have a few minutes to visit about the tax bill. So with that, if there is no further business, meeting adjourned.